Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Pam Jacobson, your host of Three Things You Need to Know. We've been doing this program for over a year, so if you're joining us new for the first time today, be sure and go back and look at some of the previous shows that I've done because I go into a lot of detail in those previous episodes about some of the things I'm going to talk about today. So last week, we talked about how diet is not necessarily the most important thing when it comes to weight loss. And this week, I want to continue that conversation and talk a little bit more about diet. But I first want to remind all of you that weight, extra weight on the body, even if it's 5 or 10 pounds over what is a comfortable baseline weight for you, is really a side effect or a symptom, if you will, much like pain would be a symptom or indigestion would be a symptom. It's a symptom of a loss of normal function in your physical body. And I want you to be is a symptom. Alleviate that symptom is to imbalance that's causing that symptom to begin with. And like pain and indigestion, our community does have, in some instances, temporary symptom relief. But again, symptom relief does not equal problem resolution, and which is why I think many of us find ourselves frustrated that we are unable to, achieve a permanent kind of state of equilibrium when it comes to our weight. We get on these programs, we go up and down, but we don't really make any true headway. And a lot of that is because we really aren't addressing the underlying issues. Now, as I discussed last week, the symptom of weight is multifactorial. There can be a number of reasons why the metabolic function in our body starts to decline. And most of those reasons have to do with what we do or do not do for ourselves in terms of self-care on a daily basis. So this is a soapbox that I've been on my whole career. It's what I'm passionate about. It's what I work with my clients on. And so those of you that have been following me know that I really ascribe to this sort of 4-pillar health foundation system. The first most important of which is sleep. And that's what we talked about last week. What I have to say this week about that is if you're not sure what to do to help yourself asleep, go back and look at, actually even interviewed a sleep researcher. Like, you are doing everything already. You've hygiene, you've tried things like melatonin and magnesium to calm your mind, and you're still struggling with falling asleep, staying asleep, feeling rested. It's probably time for you to reach out to me or someone like me in the functional medicine community that can help you get to the bottom of that. Maybe there's a significant hormonal imbalance that we need to identify. But sleep has to be dialed in order for you to really alleviate the symptom of weight. Because without rest, without proper sleep, we don't repair the metabolic structure, the cellular structure that controls all of the other processes like proper management of blood sugar. And then therefore we have a problem with the symptom of weight. So sleep, have to have it. Stress response management, I talked about last week. If you're in the jungle and the lion's chasing you, your nervous system, of which your brain is a huge piece of that, primarily drives that, is the biggest user of glucose in your body, sugar in your body. It uses that as a primary fuel source. And so if you are running in in a jungle from a lion, so you're in survival mode, the brain believes that it needs a constant supply of fast sugar, glucose, and you will then crave that kind of food to supply that, even though none of it's real. You're not in a jungle. A lion's not chasing you. You don't really need to be in any kind of survival mode, but your nervous system thinks that's the case. So if you're not managing on a daily basis your stress response, then this is going to be an issue. And I'm going to talk today specifically about carbohydrates, but this is one of the things that sets you up to have a hard time dealing with controlling carbohydrate consumption. Oh, say hi to my little pup there in the background. Sorry. She's hanging out with me a lot these days. So anyway, Carbohydrates we're going to talk about, but stress response management, it's not going to help us to know more about carbohydrates if we don't do our stress response management routines on a daily basis. Because if the nervous system thinks you're dying and you're in survival mode, you're going to probably succumb to the overwhelming desire to consume whatever that is: chocolate, popcorn, chips, whatever the fast carbohydrate is going to be. So let's assume for a minute that you're doing both of those things beautifully. You're meditating every day. You're doing your box breathing. Go back and look at the previous videos. It's all there for you. You're doing all of those things I've talked about ad nauseum for the last year, but you are still struggling with weight. So let's talk today then about dietary composition, because there's no question that diet is going to be critical for weight. However, those other 2 points I just made trump diet every single moment of the day, because you will not be able to make the best dietary choices, and your metabolism and your metabolic function will not be able to repair and operate properly if you're not getting the levels of sleep. So I just want to make that clear. There is a hierarchy: sleep, stress response, then it's really diet and exercise. Exercise is huge. I've talked about that a lot already, but you do need to move your body every day if you want to help your metabolic function repair itself, if you want to balance your weight. But let's talk about diet. So, I'm often asked by my clients, what's the best diet to lose weight? There isn't one. There isn't one. You cannot prescribe nutritional programs that can be standardized to every individual. The amount and types of foods, the macronutrients in those foods, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, varies by individual depending on so many different factors, not the least of which are some of the things we already talked about: what your stress level looks like, what your activity level looks like, just what your genetics look like. So, but I do believe, after having done this for the last 20 plus years, that there's a reasonable template, if you will. And that's why I titled this today A Template for Weight Loss. And that template would include sleep, stress response management. So remember, those two things have to be done in order for what I'm going to talk to you about in terms of diet to actually be relatively effective for you. So, and I've talked about this dietary template in the past, but I wanted to bring it up again because I was just listening to a great podcast. If you're, really a bit nerdy and want to know all this detail behind the scenes, one of my most favorite podcasters out there is Dr. Peter Attia, Attia. He has a podcast called The Drive. And his most recent podcast, he interviewed a woman who, she has an amazing personal story, which he does talk about on there. But primarily her focus has been in the area of diabetes and looking at diet and lifestyle for really complete reversal of type 2 diabetes. And she has just it was an amazing podcast with an amazing, very technical clinical discussion. And if that's something that interests you, I would highly suggest that you tune into that. But I'm going to distill some of that information here for you now in terms of that discussion. So what they were talking about was the disease diabetes, but the reality is that the vast majority of us, I believe that the statistic that she gave was about 80% of the people in our culture have some level of dysfunction on the continuum toward the ability to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And I believe that number is probably even a little bit on the low side. I would say that it's a vast majority of us. Because we don't get a lot of nutrition education. We have been swayed by the media for years with misinformation, especially about things like fat consumption. And the media really pushes hard on simple carbohydrate consumption. Lots of advertisement for things like cereals and breads and pastas and all kinds of foods that, when eaten in small amounts, may not be a problem for most of us. But these are foods that are eaten in large amounts on a daily basis by many of us, and are really responsible for the development of the obesity and diabetes epidemic that we see. But you don't just wake up one day with diabetes, right? It takes years, decades for that to happen. And I see it in my clients from very young ages. We can already see the changes happening. And it would be very easy at that point to simply shift what we're doing in terms of how we fuel ourselves on a daily basis and how we manage our self-care to avoid altogether any kind of a foray down the path toward type 2 diabetes. So what I want to impress upon you is a template that I use that I hope has made it easier, at least that's the feedback I've gotten from my clients, for them to be able to approach a meal, right? So assuming that you're sleeping well and you're managing your stress response, the next question is, how do I approach a meal so that I am able to best give my body the fuel it needs in order to have optimal function? And when I have optimal function, I will have optimal weight. And it won't happen until you develop optimal function. Now, can you lose weight by going on an extremely calorie restricted diet? Could you just do lemon water for 7 days and lose weight? Yes, you can. However, it may or may not have a negative impact on your function. That's already an issue, right? We already have a functional problem because we have the side effect or the symptom of weight. By going on hormone diets or severely calorie restricted diets or single food diets, we may be able to affect weight loss, but what we don't do is address the underlying reason for the weight to begin with. And so in relatively short order, including gastric bypass surgeries for many people, the metabolic function is not restored, and eventually the weight is put back on, and in many cases, in an even more severe fashion. So a reasonable template or approach to diet is something that I call the salad plate scenario. And the reason why I call that template the salad plate scenario is because what I'm recommending is that one of the biggest issues we have in our culture is overeating, right? Most of us eat much more or try to consume many more calories at our meals than our body actually needs. And that is damaging. That can be very damaging. And most of us would do fine on portions that would fit on a salad plate, right? So in my household, my primary meals are on a salad plate. That allows me to, without thought, to essentially just control portion size. If it doesn't fit on the plate, I don't eat it, right? If I'm eating out, I practice sort of visually the salad plate scenario. And one of my tips or tricks is at the beginning of the meal, you request your to-go box and you dump about half of your meal into that box, and you eat a much smaller portion. So to start with, we're talking about portion control, which is important. It's important because it does impact how your metabolism works. It impacts how your body deals with the influx of macronutrients like carbohydrates and proteins and fats. I mean, there's only so much that you can process at any one given time. And so the size of the meal does make a difference. So salad plate scenario. Now, how do we then approach that, right? If I'm approaching my meal with my salad plate in mind, there's a very simple sort of, I guess, template or calculation for me is half of that plate. So what are our macronutrients that we want to have on our plate, right? A balanced meal would contain carbohydrates. What are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are starches, sugars, and fiber, cellulose mainly. That's what the types of carbohydrates are. Sugars can be things like fructose, glucose. Those are kind of your primary sugars. Your starches, come from things like grains and potatoes, and they're more complex. Your sugars are more simple, meaning that they're much more quickly converted and used as fuel in the body, muscles, brain. Your complex carbohydrates tend to be used a little bit more slowly. But the bottom line is all carbohydrates, regardless of where you consume that from, whether it was a chocolate bar or a plant source, are eventually converted into glucose. That's the primary fuel that's used in the body, in the brain, in the muscles. Um, and so carbohydrates are going to be part of your meal. About 50% of the plate should be your plant foods, right? Two big handfuls of greens, a variety of vegetables. That's where you're going to get your kind of slow, complex carbohydrates from, and a host of amazing nutrients and microbiomes from these plant foods that help serve your own good bacteria. So we've got our salad plate. Half of that plate, at least half of that plate, needs to be covered in, let's just call it veggies or plant foods. I say 2 handfuls. That's an easy measure. 2 handfuls could be a salad, could be a stir fry of veggies, could be roasted veggies, whatever it is. The bottom line is you want a wide variety, right? If we look at the American Gut Project, about 30 varieties a week is what they're recommending to get a really good, balanced, good bacterial, microbial environment in our bodies. But that's going to take up the lion's share of the meal. So when I'm approaching my meal, I need to think first about my veggies because that's the biggest part of the meal. So what is that going to look like? For me, often it's a salad. But on my prep and plan day, I will cook ahead, right? I might make a big stir fry of a bunch of variety of veggies. I may do some roasted veggies, especially in the wintertime, so that I have those quickly available to put on my plate. So that leaves about 50% of my little salad plate, and about I would say 30 to 40% of that is going to be my protein. And the easy measure for that is just the open palm of my hand, right? And that's different for everybody, right? If you're a big guy with a giant hand, you're going to have, probably 6 to 8 ounces of protein. If you're a smaller female or a child, you need less amount of protein. This is a question that comes up a lot. How much protein do I need? Again, it's different for everyone. There is a calculation, 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So for me, that's about 109 grams of protein a day. And that is the figure that's used for people who are active, physically active. It's lower than that if you're sedentary for the baseline minimum. But I think for those of you who are on a health journey and you're looking to optimize health and you're moving your body every day and you're looking to lose weight because you need to have your protein building blocks to lose weight. And I've given some talks in the past about the specifics on protein. I'm not going to go into that today because my focus today was really more about carbs, and I'm going to talk about them in a minute. But I really wanted you to have this template first because we are talking about diet now for weight loss. So half of my plate is 2 handfuls of veggies. About 40% of the other half of that plate is going to be my protein source, and a real easy measure of that is just the open palm of my hand. So if you go out to dinner and you order the tomahawk steak, that's kind of large. So you're going to want to just eat that size for that meal and save the rest for another meal. And then that leaves a little tiny sliver for whatever else you might consume. This could be where you have maybe your starch, like a potato or rice. But that's only going to be about 6 bites. So it's a small amount. And that covers your protein and your carbohydrate macronutrients on your plate. Now, what about fat? Fat's super important. Okay. So those of you my age, I'll be 60 in August. I was raised in the no fat revolution, right? We wanted to have no fat in the diet. And we now understand that was really tragically the wrong information. And we're starting to see lots of brain disease because of that. The fat is another very primary fuel. Your body can fuel itself with carbohydrates and fat. And fat is just as important for the brain as carbohydrates are. So we want to make sure that we're getting an ample amount of good fats in our diet. So on our salad plate, when it comes to fats, that's what we're going to use in the preparation and in the dressing of the meal. So things like olive oil and coconut oil, grass-fed butter, ghee, Avocado is a great good fat. Those are all fats that we're going to use either to cook the foods in, or perhaps dress a salad that we're eating. Avocado can be eaten by itself. It can be added to a salad. But I want you to pay attention to getting ample amounts of good fat in your meal structure, right? So that's what our salad plate scenario looks like. So let's talk about carbohydrates. I said there's three types. There's really sugars, and there's different types of sugars. Fructose is one of them that comes from fruit. Glucose is really simple sugar that comes from, say, eating candy or a candy bar or chocolate. Then you have your starches, things like grains, your pasta, your potatoes would be considered starches. They're more complex, so they're not used as quickly. It's one of the reasons why when we're super stressed out, we tend to crave things like chocolate and candy and crackers and things that are going to be quickly converted into glucose that can be immediately used by the brain and muscles. Because remember, the nervous system brain thinks that we're running in a jungle from a lion. So we need a lot of energy to do that. And then the third is fiber, cellulose. And what I love about fiber is it dramatically slows down the way that the body manages glucose and uses the glucose. But it also is what feeds our good bacteria. And I've talked about this in other programs. But fiber is super important. So, and that would come from more of your fibrous types of vegetables. Asparagus is one of those, strawberries, because some fruits as well are very much a part of this, carbohydrate. And they could be whatever you do in your 6 bites on your salad plate as well, or used as snacks in between your meals. But the bottom line is that with carbohydrate consumption, this is a big issue for weight in our population, because we are high consumers of especially simple carbohydrates, but even complex carbohydrates. If you consume too much, it overwhelms the body's ability to manage the amount of glucose that gets converted for use. And so when it's not needed in the brain, it gets stored in the liver. One of the biggest conditions in health right now is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's on the rise. Almost anyone with diabetes, which is a metabolic disorder, is likely to have this fatty liver disease. And then it's stored in the muscle for usage during exercise and exertion, and is quickly exhausted when we are running or exercising. It's a fast amount of fuel that we use and is gone quickly. And then we also store it in the fat cells, right? The body needs to have it moved out of the bloodstream into some type of a storage capacity. So the more carbohydrates we consume, the bigger issue we're going to have with managing blood sugar, the more storage that's going to happen, and boom, side effect, weight gain, and or symptom is weight gain. So one of the key issues is what type and how much carbohydrate consumption we have on a daily basis. And the idea of the salad plate scenario is to help you do a better job of controlling that. I think part of the issue is most of us don't even know what a carbohydrate is, and don't know how to identify it, and don't know how to figure out how much we should be eating on a daily basis. And again, depending on you specifically, your carbohydrate tolerance is going to be different from mine. So here's what I would suggest. First of all, use the salad plate scenario. It's a great template. Your main meals of the day should be constructed like that. 2 handfuls of veggies, 1 palmful of protein, 6 bites of anything else. Use ample good fats. Your in-between meals, if you need a snack, it should be first a fat and protein like nuts or nut butters. And if you want to have fruit, remember, fruit is fructose, which is a fast sugar that's immediately converted. You should really minimize how much fruit you eat in a day, right? No more than 2 servings a day. And I like to see them eaten with a fat and protein to slow the use of the glucose. Fibrous fruits like apples can also, help slow how quickly the blood sugar spikes and how quickly your body uses it. But follow the salad plate scenario first and foremost. That will be helpful. And then the other thing that I think can really be helpful for those of you who are just out there like, "Ah, I just don't know what to do about weight." I look at your food list and I know what the problem is. You're eating way too many carbohydrates and you have no idea that you're doing it, right? You eat and you're eating individually. It seems like they're healthy choices, right? Oh, I've got a high quality organic yogurt and I put all these fresh organic fruits in it for my breakfast. And then I put some really like farmer's market homemade granola on top. And that's my breakfast. And then I have a banana for my snack in between. And then at lunch, I have a sandwich or I have a salad at lunch. But I have, some bread with it or some other type of a carb. And then I have another piece of fruit or two in the afternoon. And then for dinner, I have my protein. But then I also have a side of pasta or I have, and once you begin to add up the carbohydrates coming from the fruits and the grains and the processed foods, you're well into 150, 200 grams of carbs a day. There's probably not anyone in our culture that has the metabolic capacity to deal with that level of carbohydrate. So the only way you're going to know is to track it. So just use a food tracker. I don't care, MyFitnessPal, Stupid Simple Macros, there's lots of, and for a week, it's a pain in the butt, but it's so worth it because you will learn so much about what you're doing. For a week, track your food. Just track it, right? Most of those apps have great food databases. You can just pick it right off of there. It tells you how many carbohydrates. And what I would say is for the first week or two, just track and measure and see, what do the days look like in terms of how you're eating, how much protein are you getting? Are you getting, zero point 0.8, somewhere between, zero point 0.6 and 0.8 grams of protein? You're going to need closer to 0.8 or even higher if you're really exercising. How are you doing with fats, right? Are you getting a reasonable amount of fat in your diet? And then what are you doing with carbohydrates? My personal experience is that I found it really hard with the way I was eating to get the amount of protein I needed. I found it really hard to get ample amounts of good fats because I was so fat phobic, and I was way off the meter when it came to eating carbohydrates. So I think most of you, especially if you're watching this and weight's a problem, I think that's what you're going to find to be the issue. So by educating yourself and then experimenting, right? What is your carbohydrate tolerance? Over the years, I've determined that my carbohydrate tolerance is somewhere between 50 to 75 grams a day. That's not a lot. Your yogurt, fruit, granola breakfast blew that out of the water. Your bottle of organic juice that you picked, juice smoothie that you picked up at Mother's. Yes, all those ingredients, but there were 90 grams of carbs in that, and they were fast carbs. So, you really have to look beneath all of that because the foods individually might be quote unquote healthy, but the combination of what you do on a daily basis is what's going to create the weight issue for you. So you're not going to know unless you track, and you're not going to know unless you set parameters and track long enough and teach yourself what your own tolerance is to carbohydrate and how much protein is enough protein. And you're going to know because you get balanced. Your weight drops, your energy goes up, and you feel more balanced, right? So use a salad plate scenario as your template as you approach the meal. If you need to snack, make sure it's fat and protein. And if you're going to do fruit, keep it to a couple of pieces a day. Make sure that you're consuming this approach to diet is moderately low carb, mostly coming from vegetables, moderately higher fat, coming only from the good fats that I mentioned. There aren't many to choose from. And I got news for you folks. Canola oil isn't one of them. Olive oil, coconut oil, grass-fed butter and ghee, avocado, nuts, nut butters. That's about it. There's not a lot of good fats on your list. So you want to be incorporating all of those throughout your day in your preparation, your dressing of your meal, your snacks in between meals. And then your protein consumption. Make sure you're getting, it's hard to lose weight if you don't have ample amounts of complete proteins. And I won't go into detail. There's, if you're vegan or vegetarian or you eat animal proteins, it just make sure that you're getting enough of your proteins on a daily basis. But use your salad plate scenario and then track and measure, right? First, just track, don't change anything so that you can see what you've been doing. Because I believe you're going to get a pretty big aha moment when you see that you're probably far exceeding 100 grams of carbohydrates a day, not hitting your protein mark, probably not anywhere near any kind of good fat level either. And then once you've got that information, then set some goals for yourself, right? You could start with, when I first started, I said, okay, I'm just gonna see how I feel on 50 grams of carbohydrates a day. And I lost weight immediately. There was a transition period for me where I had a couple of days where I felt, as my body transitioned and was using fat a little more efficiently, where I had some fatigue, but I quickly adjusted. And have to say that for me, at 50 grams, I felt the best I've ever felt in my life. But I recognized that I could go up to 75 grams, and occasionally even up over 100 grams of carbs a day, and I would still feel fine. As the pandemic has come along, and like all of you, all my routines have changed, and the pantry is literally outside my door. I found myself, well, plus the stress of everything, I found myself craving carbohydrates, and I was eating more and not tracking. And within very short order, picking up 3, 4, 5 pounds, starting to feel fatigued, having some joint changes and joint pain. And so it's very clear. You're going to know if you feel great, then that's a good level for you. If you still are carrying your weight, you still feel achy in the morning, you still feel fatigued, it's too much. So experiment with what your tolerance is. I can tell you, for most of us, especially my ladies that are, at menopausal range, you're probably looking at south of 100 grams of carbs a day, somewhere between 50 and 100. You can play in that zone. And you probably need a lot more protein than you're eating. So just play with it, because here's the honest to God's truth. I don't care what anybody out there is selling you. Nobody has the answer. There's no panacea. There's no special diet that works for everyone. It really is lifestyle, and you have to figure out what your tolerance levels are, especially when it comes to carbohydrate consumption. So I hope you found this helpful. You can always reach out. It doesn't cost anything to ask me a question or to request that I talk about a particular topic. If you want to work with me as a practitioner, then we can discuss what that looks like. But I can help you sleep better. I can help you lose weight. I can help you optimize your health. So please feel free. I've put all my contact information here. Otherwise, tune in every week. I think this is some great information. I hope you have a good week, and I'll be back with you, as always, next Wednesday, 9 a.m. Pacific. Take care.